Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is from Pfizer, Mr. Peter Henstock. He's a strategic and technical leader applying machine learning, data mining, visualization, and analytics skills to solve key data science problems. Data science is a hybrid field integrating computer science, statistics, and a lot of business knowledge. This standard skill set emphasizes breadth over depth, yet both are critical. And without any further ado, I want to introduce Peter to the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. So my talk is today about natural language processing in pharma. And this is a hot topic these days because there's so much unstructured data available, and there's a lot of needs to leverage it for different purposes. So the reason we're doing this is we really want to construct knowledge. We want to take data and be able to use it in an efficient way. And where does knowledge come from? Well, Pedro Domingos and his 5 tribes of machine learning discussed how it comes from evolution. Birds don't have to learn how to build a nest. They have that built into them. On a shorter time frame, we have culture, where we pass information between generations on a different time span. And of course, we have our own knowledge and experience, our own training that guides our actions. However, as the information starts coming at us faster and faster, we're relying on different techniques to extract that knowledge from it. And today, it's now artificial intelligence and computing that we're relying on. There are so many papers and articles around even a small area of our fields that we can't keep up with it. We can't have teams of people read all the papers, and so we're relying on a search algorithm to find the right papers or to deliver the actual knowledge to us. So why do we do this? Well, the amount of data that's available to us is increasing, and it's growing quite a bit, and our analytical capability hasn't improved that much over the last several years. And so there's a gap between these two. And while we do analyze all our data for our primary usage, there's many opportunities to use it for secondary usages and tertiary ones. And so this gap is growing, and it's really a lost value of our data, of how we can best leverage our data to make decisions. So we see lots of different industries have actually been transformed through this process of leveraging data and turning it into knowledge. And we have the self-driving car that's about to hit. We have tractors in agriculture. These tractors are self-driving. They have GPS. They can sample the soil. They can figure out which fertilizer is needed in different areas and everything else. Of course, the finance and manufacturing areas have been governed by AI for a number of years now as well. So why not pharma? Well, pharma has been involved in AI. We have lots of opportunities in both drug research and in drug development. And so if we break down the overall process of research, it goes from target selection to the different kinds of screening, to lead optimization, more testing, and then onto development, it's clinical trials, onto submissions and approvals. And of course, there's business applications beyond that. But there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different small problems that fall within this space. These include the different literature mining, data analyses, multivariate optimization, support for patients, wearable sensors, and many other areas. And these are all major fields. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them today, really in the literature mining, which occurs earlier on in the target selection, and also areas we're looking at in terms of clinical trial submissions. So natural language processing is essentially the AI for text. It's also for speech, but it has many different applications within pharma and in general life. It really is based on linguistics. They had some key problems such as name identity recognition, the ability to recognize a drug name, a disease name, a person's name, and so on. It's also the extraction of the relationships between these entities, which is interesting. We also have word sense disambiguation, about how to identify which is the correct sense of a particular word, and other aspects. In terms of functions, we use it all the time. We have search, Google search, and so on. We're recognizing topics. We want to summarize things, spelling correction, and many other areas. We're now heading into this direction of knowledge extraction, where we figure out the entities, how they relate to each other, and figure out how those relate on a hierarchy for each term. So I can ask a question of which kinase spines, which is a subset of the overall genes. But there's also different kinds of kinases that would also have to match against. When I say bind, should it be a binding operation, or should it be an inhibition, or any other kind of functional assay? What exactly is the relationship? And can we capture those things effectively? And of course, even for our field, we have a lot of specialized functions. People have done some research that's quite interesting into speech patterns that are associated with different diseases. We have the extraction of health records, electronic health records, looking at trends in other areas. So there's a wide range of possibilities within the NLP space. I mentioned it came from linguistics, and really a lot of the work is kind of built up from this linguistics pyramid, where we start at the bottom with the lexical or word level, think about the morphology or how words change, perhaps in chemistry or biology, but also the conjugation of verbs, plural forms, and so on. There's a semantics layer, which is meaning, the syntax layer, which is grammar, and then there's higher order things about how people speak differently in different languages. In English, people with different backgrounds tend to use the same words in different ways. And of course, that also applies to their own languages. And lastly, pragmatics is languages of function. But most of these is focused on the lower ends of the tree. We can think about the different revolutions in natural language processing as coming from these different levels. One of the first methods was for search. It was called the bag of words method, or BOW for short. The idea was that we don't have to worry about anything about the order of the words. We just take a series of different words, and if we can find something similar to those things in a document, well, that's an effective search. In fact, it's worked for many years. It's also applicable for document clustering, document classification, and many other techniques. We've also tried to look at grammars, in particular statistical grammars, which are the syntax. And these have had some success. There are some good parsers available, but in general, they've been very difficult. The reason is that there's so much ambiguity in the way we speak and the way we write that we have to figure out not only which is the correct interpretation grammatically, but it's how we build in the semantics and the social linguistics and pragmatics into it that really drive its meaning. One technique that's really a statistical technique that came out a few years ago is this latent Dirichlet allocation that focuses on statistics at the lexical level, but actually is quite powerful. Let me show you what that means. So in this slide, I have a bunch of text that's about a biology idea. But what if I assembled a large corpus, a large set of documents that focus on things that I care about? The LDA, as it's called, breaks each document and assumes that it's broken into a number of different topics. Well, you're saying, well, why is it broken into topics? Well, if you think about a research paper, it starts off in very general terms and talks about the overall field. Then there's a method section, which is quite different from everything else. There's a results section in other areas. But even within each of those sections, there's a breakdown you could talk about of topics and how we focus and write our language in English, and scientific English in particular. And each topic is then broken up into a series of terms. And so here I've taken this one thing about DMD, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It's identified all the words that are associated with a topic. And it's saying that there's a mixture of topics that are present. And so here's my green words, which look like they talk about different negative aspects of diseases, oxidative stress, death, necrosis, and so on. And I have in red different body parts, essentially, cellular parts, muscle fiber, lamina, cytoskeleton, and so on. And so these are two topics. It's identified automatically. And here's the distribution of those topics in this particular document. And so let me say what it's doing again. It's taking a large set of documents, going through, identifying different topics based upon word groupings, and then breaking each document down into a group of topics which contain these different words. And so using purely statistics, which is why it's a latent Dirichlet allocation, it's breaking up the documents into interesting pieces without any further knowledge. However, this technique is still limited. It can't do everything. And so there have been some more advanced techniques that have come on board. And in particular, Word2Vec and GloVe. Word2Vec came to us several years ago from Google, and GloVe came to us from Stanford about the same time. And what they're focused on is the syntax and the semantics layers. This has really changed a lot of the NLP work. So they're quite similar to each other, so I'll just focus on the word tvec. The idea is that can we learn from a context? And so here I have the sentence, I like music spiked with pain and music is my aeroplane. This is the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I believe. And so if we take one word, can we predict the words right before it, or perhaps the words before and after it? And so it's training a very shallow neural network to take that word and try to predict these three words. You can also do the opposite and say, well, here's my context, and I want to predict the word of interest. And so how do we do that? Well, we take all these different phrases and we put in one after the other, and every time there's an airplane, the last one, we're trading up what the words are around it. And so it's making a very wide set of selections. There's so many different inputs and many different outputs for all possible word combinations, more or less. But it's predicting the context. Do we care about predicting the context? Well, not really. But what it gives us is a series of weights in the middle that allow us to quantify what the word airplane means or what the context of the word airplane is. And so if we have the context, well, we would say that similar words will occur in a similar context. And so all of a sudden we have a way of generating synonyms. We can look for distances between words that are quantified by this vector. And after trading on a large corpus, that's pretty good estimate of what a synonym is. And so we've essentially quantified meaning and context, which is a powerful idea. And we can use that for different things. We can use that for search to say, well, I don't find this exact word in this particular paper, but I find similar words to it. And if we do that repeatedly, well, we have a much improved version of clustering, classification, and many other linguistics problems. A lot of these work has been replaced and advanced with the BERT family. This is a modern architecture of deep learning that trains up on massive sets of documents. And it came from Google, and it leverages really the lexical, morphological, semantics, and the syntax layers all together. It trains not on just a local context, but it trains on sentences or maybe a couple sentences, and can identify interesting attributes. It's found it's been a really major step forward for all the natural language processing. It stands for this bidirectional encoder representations from transformers, which is quite a mouthful. But the idea is that you can read words forward and backwards, but you can read them at the same time. And if you focus on this idea of transfer learning, where we can train up on a large set of corpus data, for instance, we can train up on all the PubMed plus all the clinicaltrials.gov plus electronic health records and those kinds of things, we can get some very precise definitions from our particular area of research. And so we can specialize this and identify the word context just related to medicine and drug discovery. And so we're using it for text classification, question answering, chatbots, and many other applications. I said it's based on this transformer architecture. It's a really complex set of ideas, but it leverages this idea of attention and has an architecture that looks like this. Previously, it replaced the RNNs and LSTMs, which came before it. So I won't dwell on the architecture of that, but instead focus on this idea of attention. If we have the sentence, the animal didn't cross the road because it was tired, linguists have been trying to solve this problem of what it refers to. And we can look backward and make some guesses, but it's not always accurate. But in the BERT model, it takes out different words and looks at it. It can identify the strength of the connections between words or past words. And so it's able to solve these linguistics problems of anaphora and reference that have been plaguing the linguistics fields for decades. So it is a powerful linguistics tool. So how are we using these kinds of things in our work? We had this one project which was run by a group of students at Harvard called the Winnow Project. So the idea was is that we want to come up with a hypothesis for which genes are associated with a particular disease and which diseases are associated with a particular gene. So you could use this for generating hypotheses, but you can also use it to constrain your search. If you're in the cardiovascular field, you don't care about all the genes, you only care about some limited set. So within your context, you can focus on a gene search. And so what it's doing is it's going through it in PubMed, pulling out all the data, pulling out all the genes and diseases, and looking for the co-occurrence of these two different terms. When it finds it, it can statistically rank them and use a test that will allow it to identify the top terms. And so it's mining the 30 million abstracts, looking for the co-occurrence, and applying a chi-squared test to the results. And so it will give us the ones that are upregulated in a sense. So if we start with a particular gene, it will rank the given diseases based on their significance of the chi-squared test, which indicates what are the chances of occurring by random or what's the chance of occurring by a greater significant chance. And so we have this measure that can quickly go through all these articles and identify the key attributes. We can also dial in, look at the articles themselves. And so it's an enhanced interface for PubMed, if you will. It's based on an AWS architecture, and it's having to mine the 30 million abstracts, all the diseases and genes from them, put them into a large database, and then it serves up this. And here's the architecture diagram for this particular system, where it's extracting all the texts as they come available from PubMed every couple of days, ingests them, parses them, and puts them into a result of a database, and serves up the results for a search in a efficient manner. So that's one use case of the text mining. Another one is a bit more advanced. It's our Genie project by a different group of students. It deals with trend detection. So you're probably familiar with trends. For instance, the Google trends. These look for the frequency of different searches as a function of time. And so here we're looking from 2010 on to 2019 or so, and we see that CNN, convolutional neural networks, is kind of in line with natural language processing, but deep learning has a lot more trends really since about 2012 or so, which is the origin of it. And it's kind of plateaued recently. But can we use this kind of information for our research? Well, one idea is that we've been trying to figure out how our industry compares to other industries. And if we mine Factiva data and look at it, we can look at the fraction of articles that are focused on AI topic in each of the different industries. And so for technology, we find about 4% of the articles are described with AI. In business, it's about 2%. In healthcare in general, it's just over 1.25%, which is, it's growing. It's heading in the right direction. We're still behind many other fields, but we're arguably in the middle of the pack in terms of general fields. So again, can we use this for other things? The challenge that we presented these students was, can you look at these, again, these gene-disease relationships? And can you find or predict which ones will make it to a phase 2 trial 5 years from now or more? So this is quite a challenge, just leveraging literature without any human oversight to make a prediction on what's going to make a phase 2 trial. And so they set it up as a retrospective. They mined the PubMed again with the 30 million abstracts. For the truth of which ones made it to a phase 2, they looked at the clinicaltrials.gov and extracted all the data from that. And so putting these two things together, they first came up with a very nice interface for visualization. This particular one is looking at the gene P53. We see that trending upward, and it's looking for breast neoplasms. Again, a nice trend by itself. Together, they form this kind of metric. And so this is looking at the frequency of these different articles and how these two terms are occurring together from 2004 or so through 2019, I think it was. And so we see a trend, but that's interesting. We can dial into the actual articles and look through them, but it's not a prediction. So we had to extract this data and then see if we could go further. And the results are kind of promising. It showed an AUC of 71%, predicting on blind data. So what does that mean? It means that we can get about 3/4 or 80% or so correct, and included in that set would be about 20% of the wrong combinations. So it's reasonable. A perfect result would be in the top left corner. A random result would be roughly a 45-degree line from the leftmost point to the rightmost point. And so it's actually quite impressive that it actually can make a prediction just on these trends. So what's leading to these kinds of results? I think the actual result was a a gradient boosting machine that proved to be the best one and defeated the neural networks and other approaches. The features that led to the best results were the number of cumulative citations that particular article had. So it had to go look forward, look back, and see how many articles cited the particular ones that it was using. The other interesting features were the rankings of the particular journal in which it appeared. So these were important metadata features that led to the feature importance. Again, this is another complicated workflow. It uses the Google's BigQuery data to extract all the data, mine out all the features, and then make all the predictions. And so there's a lot of text wrangling in order to make these queries, understand the data, as well as to extract the features that could be used, combining the metadata with the actual references and other features in order to make the predictions. Another project is called OpenPSV, or Open Patent Scope Visualization. This project mined patent space. And so if we think about the workflow that we have for patents in epitopes, lawyers typically search for patents. In this particular case, we're looking for antibodies that are useful as drugs. And an antibody can bind to any protein in a particular location and impede its function, which is the actual treatment. And so what we are looking for is, can we find locations on which the antibodies will bind? That is, the epitopes. If we can find those things, can we extract all the information of all the claims and then present that back to the scientists so they know where to look, and also to the lawyer team, who would normally spend several weeks reading all the different claims. So we didn't focus on the search for patents because there's lots of great commercial and public domain tools that can find the patents. Instead, we said, well, if you've already done a search, lawyers, and you have dozens of these patents that are 50 to 100 pages each, we're going to save you the trouble of going through and reading all the articles, all the patents, that is, extract all the information, and then build the view for it. And so they did that. They identified all the sequences that were found in the patents with different references. Here's one example. They also had to take the claims, which is the more challenging part. And of course, it's in lawyer speak. And so the isolated antibody of claim 1, wherein the conformational epitope comprises amino acids L14, L15, S16, and so on. And of course, these claims are written in different ways. The amino acid sequence of sequence ID number 1 or sequence ID number 2, the epitope CNTK, and so on. And so they had to unscramble all these things, extract all the claims, and then build the visualization, which looks like this. And so what it allows the scientists and the lawyers to do is to go through, look at the different residues associated with our target protein, and figure out which are claimed by the different patents from Amgen, Pfizer, and other companies, so they can figure out where are the interesting areas to look and where are the interesting areas to find some functionality that hasn't previously been patented. So it's an interesting project in terms of patent mining. And again, it has a technology stack based on AWS, using AWS Amplify, SAM, and front end with React. So what's next for NLP? We're really focused now on the knowledge graph idea. If we can extract the different entities, such as the genes, the SNPs, the diseases, drugs, and so on, well, then we can construct a new data type for it, which is a knowledge graph. And there's lots of advantages for doing it. One is that it's a human-readable form of representing knowledge. It's also computer amenable, so computers like this format, and there's lots of graph databases and other approaches that are used to represent not only the different nodes, but the relationships between the different nodes. And so we could say this SNP is modifying this particular gene, which upregulates this other gene, which downregulates this gene, and this is affected by a particular drug. If we have our data in this kind of format, we can use machine learning to then make predictions and say, well, maybe this COVID or non-COVID drug could be useful for predicting a link from a drug to a particular disease. And so using machine learning, we can make these kind of predictions, which tie into drug repurposing and other aspects, but it's actually the broader applications. Can you predict side effects? If a drug fails, can you figure out why it fails? And these kinds of things. And so there's a lot of opportunity to improve from where we are now, which is kind of a search-based approach, to a knowledge graph kind of approach. If we have our data from lots of applications in this kind of format, well, then we can do things with it. And one thing we'd like to be able to do is perhaps automatically generate reports. We know that structured data can be used to write sports stories and financial stories, because we see these in the news quite frequently. But can we also use it to do more interesting things, such as generate reports automatically from our data, which is highly curated and known to be true, for the FDA? Can we write statistical analysis plans and other documentation? We're also looking at further applications of NLP. Can we use it to recruit patients and identify who might make good candidates based on EHR? The FDA has new guidelines on terms of diversity and who should be included in trials, but how do we figure out what the right state of diversity is? We find ourselves mining health records and mining the PubMed again in different articles to extract this kind of information, another NLP task. And lastly, can we predict the success of clinical trials based upon literature searches and combinations of other data? This is the PTRS, the probability of technical regulatory success problem, which remains a challenge, but something we're looking at internally, and also looking at partnerships with different companies. And so there's a lot of opportunities for taking unstructured data, combining it together, and trying to leverage it to make predictions on this billion-dollar question. Some new things that are coming up, which are kind of exciting. One is fact-checking. Before we submit something for an FDA or even a journal, we have all these different facts that are cited. Normally, we go back for the FDA and go through every single article and prove that the citation is correct. But can we use NLP to do exactly the same thing, to take the citation, go back to the article, and try to find exactly the right sentence that has that fact, so we can assert that it is correct? Another one is text simplification. We know that we can do automatic language translation from, say, English to Chinese and back, and the quality is reasonably good. But can we use the same technology to go from a complicated medical text to something simple, such as a fifth grade level? And we might want to do this for our drug labels. And so we would take the complicated section that's intended for our medical folks. Can we simplify it automatically? And the reason we do this is because the labels keep getting changed quite frequently. They have to be changed across languages, and there's many different drugs. So this process could automate a major bottleneck. So I'd like to conclude and thank the different people who helped me write these projects, the Winnow team, the Genie team, and the OpenPSV team. These were powered by Harvard students and sponsored by Pfizer partners. And I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, Peter. We'll open the floor now to any questions, comments, or remarks for Peter in regards to his talk on AI and ML. So I'll give everyone a minute here if they want to take a moment. And Peter speaks at a lot of conferences like Pharma IQ and a lot of other in the AI related tracks. So you can find a lot of his talks at other programs as well, where he talks about the intersection of AI, visualization, software engineering, mostly applied to drug discovery, but also I believe clinical trials as well. Thank you so much for your presentation, Peter.